6 June 1944. Hedgerow country west of St. Lo. German gunners wait behind trimmed earth walls, certain the first American tank will burn and the rest will freeze. For months they mocked the tall-sided Sherman and the radio chatter they believed would splinter under fire. The trap snaps flash smoke metal and the column does not stall. Voices cut clean, break contact. Smoke the lane, hook right, fire for effect. Seconds, not armor, decide. The kill zone unthreads, the guns go quiet. Axis confidence collides with an invisible edge, the network that moves faster than fear and turns chaos into choreography. Before this lane and this morning, the Axis had reasons to feel untouchable. Their manuals, gunners, and fieldcraft taught a cruel arithmetic. Choose the ground, prepare the slit, let the target enter, strike first, vanish. A pack 40 in a hedgerow, mouth a panzer hull, low in orchard shade, velocity, and camouflage settling the argument before the enemy could think. They prized precision, initiative, and the economy of a perfect ambush. Reports from early campaigns confirmed the faith-stunned opponents' stalled columns, wrecks smoking at crossroads. They also believed the American tank arm was clumsy, high silhouettes, thin armor crews drowning in undisciplined radio chatter. If the first shot landed, the rest would hesitate. If the lane was blocked, the column would bunch. If the command net was noisy and no one would hear the one order that mattered. In this worldview, speed belonged to the side that struck first. Control belonged to the side that planned best. And so they arrived in Normandy certain the pattern would hold. Americans would meet steel with steel, late and loud, while German guns decided the tempo. What they misjudged wasn't metal. It was time, how quickly a voice could turn seconds into survival. They laughed because what they saw seemed obvious. The American tank to German eyes looked like a tall, soft target with too many mouths talking at once. In North Africa and Italy, early impressions hardened into doctrine. Shermans silhouetted high against ridgelines, crews new to fire, platoons bunching at choke points when the lead vehicle took a hit. To an ambush culture that worshipped the first shot, this looked like a solvable equation. Put a high-velocity gun at the right angle, let the enemy enter the geometry and collect wrecks. On the air, the Americans sounded noisy. German operators schooled in strict net discipline, and brevity heard across captured sets and monitoring vans, a babble of overlapping calls, reports, corrections, anxieties. They mistook training nets for combat nets, rehearsals for reality, and they generalized. To them, American chatter was proof that when steel started to fly, the net would collapse into chaos. If the command channel failed at precisely the moment of decision, then even a sturdy enemy would act like a herd, hesitate, stop, present flanks, die. They also judged by hardware tables. A Sherman 75mm gun on paper lost the duel at long range to a Pack 40 or Panther's 75. Armor thickness looked inferior. The silhouette invited the aimer's eye. And radios, so many radios per unit, seemed more liability than advantage if the people using them were undisciplined. Germans prized economy, one clear net, one clear order, one decisive movement. The American ideal, saturate the force with sets, intercoms, and linkages, sounded extravagant and fragile. What if weather rolled in? What if ground clutter swallowed signals? What if a single jammed frequency paralyzed a column that couldn't move without talking? Terrain reinforced contempt. The bocage favored stealth and angles, not talk and speed. Close hedgerow fights compress time and sightlines. Who needs a symphony of circuits when the kill zone is 30 meters wide? In theory, a hidden gun firing first into a narrow lane ends the conversation before it starts. Add mines a felled tree and a secondary gun sighted at 90 degrees, and the textbook says the victim will mill in fear. The Germans believed the textbook. They misunderstood two things. First, they thought communications were about more words. American radios were not there to narrate. They were there to make seconds obedient. A short code, 2 or 3 words, could trigger an entire play that had been drilled on a dry field months earlier. Second, they thought resilience lived in steel. American resilience increasingly lived in redundancy, multiple nets, rehearsed handoffs, forward observers tied to batteries by prearranged triggers, and interphone systems that let a crew act like a single organism. Radios did not replace discipline, they multiplied it. From a distance, the American way still looked like clutter. Up close inside the first 10 seconds of an ambush, it looked like compressing chaos into a plan. But German confidence had been fed by years of success earned honestly by gunners and commanders who could read ground, who did place a gun where it could not be seen and yet could see. That success made them sure the same baited geometry would always work. They mocked what they mistook not a love of talk, but an obsession with turning human thought into synchronized motion. And because that obsession traveled on invisible waves, it was easy to ignore until those waves arrived faster than fear. Normandy was a duel of seconds hidden inside a maze. The bocage carved the countryside into walled rooms. Every sunken lane was a throat, every gap a door controlled by whoever aimed first. German anti-tank guns peered from hedgerow slits. Panzer hulls idled in orchard shade. Infantry with Panzerfausts crouched behind earthen berms. The opening shot, almost always German, shattered the lead vehicle, and with it the column's sightline. Then came the ancient dilemma in a modern war move: and die or stop and die slower. At this scale, maps lied. A harmless bend hid a prepared field of fire. A farmhouse masked a switching position. A hedgerow corner concealed mines and a secondary gun at right angles. Poor visibility strangled flanking fire. Artillery power evaporated when calls were late or vague. Units that paused to think clogged the lane, and the ambusher's rhythm fire, displaced fire again, turned hesitation into losses. Strategically, divisions had to break out before German reserves cemented the front. Tactically, armored columns had to preserve momentum or bleed to a crawl at 20 yards a time. Command and control frayed under stress. Battalion knew its intent. The platoon at the corner felt the shock. The artillery battery waited on a grid that had to be exact. Between these points, seconds vanished, eaten by confusion, bad weather, engine noise, and the sheer friction of men trying to agree on what they were seeing. Wire was impractical. Runners were too slow. AM voice dissolved into mush under summer storms and motor whine. A single misheard correction could throw a barrage onto the wrong hedge. A single missed order could leave a platoon facing a kill zone with no smoke, no hook, no mutual fire. The American answer began before contact, not after. The FM radio battle network, SCR 508-528, sets in every tank and key leader crew, interphones binding 5 men into one mind-firm company, and battalion nets with strict brevity, forward observers living on the maneuver net, artillery liaisons already listening. FM mattered because intelligibility survives where AM drowns. The discriminator ignores amplitude trash. The capture effect lets one strong voice seize the listener. Brevity mattered because 2 words must move 4 vehicles: smoke lane, hook right, black battery alpha. Just as important was pre-commitment. Leaders walked the route with a mental playbook: if ambushed left at TRP alpha throw, white smoke and hook right. If contact front at a choke point, reverse 2 hull lengths, 1 down 2 up. If the enemy gun must withdraw through hedge 27, call fire for effect on the pre-registered grid. The battle network didn't invent these plays, it made them executable in seconds. The first shot remained theirs, the second, third, and fourth could become yours. On the ground, this looked like choreography under shock. The first round hit. The column did not freeze. Smoke blossomed across the lane. 2 Shermans pivoted off axis to cut the ambusher's angle. Infantry slid along the ditch to restore flank eyes. The forward observer's calm voice walked a curtain of 105s across the likely retreat line. What had taken a minute now took a breath. The lane remained a lane, not a trap. Crucially, the battle network reduced uncertainty, the one problem guns cannot solve. Armor thickness helps after you're hit. Clear orders help before the second shot lands. Big guns win open duels. The battle network wins broken fights, intersections, orchards, villages, fog, where visibility, geometry, and fear conspire against cohesion. It allowed distributed initiative without chaos. A loader's warning reached his crew instantly through interphone. A platoon sergeant corrected a hook mid-pivot. An FO cut into the company net, the moment map and eyes aligned. Decision density rose but remained intelligible. Safety improved in quiet ways that don't make posters. Friendly fire fell when grids were confirmed in one breath. Mines claimed fewer tracks when the lead tank's warning reached every driver, not just the next one. Resupply found columns in weather that once muted AM. Maintenance swaps took minutes because racks, cables, and connectors had been standardized by people who assumed rain, mud, and fatigue were not edge cases, they were Tuesday. The American problem had never been courage or cannon. It was time how to turn intention into synchronized action, fast enough to escape the ambusher's geometry. The FM radio battle network bought time in pennies, clear syllables, shared brevity, pre-registered fires spent in the first 6 seconds after shock. In hedgerow rooms where steel ruled, it carved out a breath. And a breath in that country was life. It did not start in a hedgerow. It started in a room that smelled of warm varnish rosin and coffee gone bitter on a hot plate. Metal racks held black boxes with their covers off. Chassis open like rib cages, coils lacquered in amber paper, capacitors banded like candy tubes, idling with the faintest orange coal. A technician in rolled sleeves leaned close with a non-magnetic screwdriver, listening for a change not in volume, but in shape. Static crackled, thinned, and then there it was, a human syllable sharp-edged and clean where mush had lived. He didn't cheer. He scribbled a number, nudged a slug, and made the clarity repeat. The idea was older than the war and stubbornly practical if voice itself could be made resilient. If it could cut through lightning engine whine and summer thunder, then orders could travel as reliably as gasoline. Frequency modulation had been argued on chalkboards and proven on towers. Now the Signal Corps wanted proof in armor, a set a tanker could trust, when fear tightened his throat and rain hammered his hatch. Factories in New Jersey and Michigan learned the choreography. Depots learned the ritual. Fort Monmouth taught the language. The black box that would ride in a Sherman's bustle rack wore a plain tag SCR 508, the humblest name for a weapon that regulated time. Innovation here wore work boots. Someone designed the FT 237 rack so a violent stop wouldn't rip the set loose. Someone else routed antenna bases so a commander swinging out of the cupola wouldn't snag the whip. A maintenance sergeant soaked to the waist during an amphibious rehearsal wrote a rule in grease pencil that became liturgy, every connector sealed, every cover doped, every crew drilled to swap a set in the rain in under 5 minutes. None of it looked like genius. All of it looked like survival. Doctrine men came to watch. An artillery liaison officer put 2 fingers on the bench and asked the only question that mattered. If they can hear like this, can we move fire like a reflex? Instructors, practical romantics, answered with a new grammar. They took the endless possibilities of panic and reduced them to small muscular verbs. Smoke lane, hook right, black battery TRP alpha. The FM radio battle network was not born only of circuits. It was born of brevity and rehearsal. In Texas, dust and English drizzle platoons ran the same shock over and over until seconds learned their places. The supply chain found a rhythm. Tubes, transformers, handsets, looms of cable, women with soldering irons checked and rechecked joints. Men with gauges tapped meters like gamblers. A line boss chalked 2 numbers on a board, output per shift, and the one that mattered more, sets per platoon. He didn't draw victory arrows. He drew a timing ladder: contact, smoke in 5, hook in 15, steel in 30. Manufacturing was building more than hardware. It was building seconds. Testing looked like theater with a stopwatch. A troop eased into a mock village between stacked hay bales. An umpire lit a blank charge. The first tank halted. The second flinched. The third was already angling off axis because a lieutenant's voice arrived intact through engine drone: hook right 2. White smoke. The forward observer living on the maneuver net did not wait for invitation. He walked a grid onto a chalked hedgerow and spoke the battery awake. The umpire clicked and frowned 32 seconds from shock to curtain. Back at the bench, a man who had never seen a hedgerow tightened an IF transformer anyway. Margins were mercy. By mid-1944, the pieces interlocked SCR 508-528 in tanks and half-tracks. Interphone binding crews into single mines. Company and battalion nets policed by brevity. Forward observers and liaison officers that listened where the movement lived. TRPs pinned to overlays before dawn. Pre-commitment drills that made choice look like instinct. None of it was dramatic. All of it was decisive. The Americans were not betting that steel could ignore geometry. They were betting that a voice carried clean could rearrange geometry before the second shot landed. The last mile before embarkation looked like any depot, mud crates, clipboards, but a quiet heresy had taken root. Planners began to pencil time alongside distance. 8 miles per hour through hedgerow lanes if ambushed twice per kilometer, and if recovery averages 30 seconds. That line on a pad was not a boast. It was a promise born in labs and benches kept or not by the first breath after shock. On the day the crates were craned aboard, nobody posed for the photograph that history deserved. The boxes did not look like victory. They looked like chores. But inside the wood and felt and oil paper was an idea made practical: stitch every fragment of a fight into one conversation and make that conversation strong enough to survive weather fear and the noise of machines. The FM radio battle network did not make men brave. It made bravery coherent. Strip the romance away, and the heart of it is simple clarity under shock, discipline in speech, and redundancy in paths poured into men and machines until seconds obey. Start with physics. FM rejects what kills AM. Lightning may slam the amplitude. Engines may smear the floor with hum. The hedgerow may bounce echoes into the ether. The discriminator doesn't care. It listens for frequency swing, not loudness. Add the capture effect, one strong signal seizes the listener, and a platoon leader's voice arrives as a single command, not a chorus of ghosts. In rain, under artillery concussion, with fans howling and 50 cal bolts, clacking syllables survive. Survival of syllables is survival of intent, then the wiring of people. The interphone makes 5 men one mind. The company net moves vehicles. The battalion net moves weight. An artillery liaison straddles both and speaks steel on demand. A forward observer doesn't stand on formality. He already inhabits the maneuver net, ready to cut in with grids the instant map and eyes agree. This is not complexity for its own sake. It is redundancy tuned to shock. If one handset dies, another speaks. If a net clogs, a parallel path carries the same verbs. The sauce is also pre-commitment. Leaders don't invent plays in contact. They declare them before daylight. TRPs are pinned. Routes are annotated with if-then trees if ambushed left at alpha smoke and hook right. If contact front at a notch reverse, 2-1 down, 2 up. If the enemy gun must withdraw through hedge 27 fire for effect on the pre-registered grid. The radio doesn't add words. It removes them. 2 calls smoke lane, black battery alpha. Detonate a sequence that 100 rehearsals stored in muscle. Intelligibility is engineered into the human moment. Nets are policed for brevity because breath is a budget. Sets are tuned for voice so consonants, the teeth of meaning, punch through. Sloppy circuits force repeats and steal tempo. A clean circuit lets a lieutenant spend 5 words to move 5 vehicles. That is not style. That is survival math. Tactics adapt around the medium. German Doctrine designs the kill geometry. The American Habit designs the recovery geometry. The first shot remains theirs, good gunners earn it. The second, third, and fourth shots can be yours if smoke blooms on the lane in 5 seconds, if 2 hulls pivot off axis in 15, if a curtain of 105s falls on the retreat line before a gun can bump to its secondary. Radios don't thicken armor, they thicken options. Strategically, this reassigns the terms of the fight. Big guns and thick plates win open duels. The FM radio battle network wins broken fights, intersections. Orchards, villages fog the habitats of ambush. It reduces the one variable steel cannot uncertainty. Friendly fire falls when grids are confirmed in one breath. Mines claim fewer tracks when a lead tank's warning becomes everyone's warning. Resupply lands on the right road in weather that used to mute AM. Commanders can retask a company inside a breath because the liaison is already listening. Even maintenance is part of the recipe. Standardized racks, cables, and connectors mean a crew can resurrect a dead net in minutes, not hours. Waterproofing is not a footnote. It's the difference between a voice and a funeral on a wet afternoon. The system assumes rain, mud, and fatigue are not anomalies, they are Tuesday, and it works anyway. What most observers miss is the accounting of seconds. Armor thickness is visible, muzzle velocity photographs well, but it is the 10-second delta repeated all day that turns a stalemate into momentum. The FM radio battle network manufactures those deltas. It doesn't promise invulnerability. It promises that after the first shock, a unit can still think together and act faster than fear. In the bocage, that is the only superiority that matters, not outranging the enemy, but outdeciding him again and again until the road belongs to you. 25. July 1944. The St. Lo to Marigny Road, Normandy. Dawn is a smear of gray over hedgerows, the air heavy with dust that will soon be bomb smoke. Operation Cobra is about to blow a door in the German front, and armored columns wait in sunken lanes like coiled wire. In each Sherman's bustle sits an SCR 508. Interphone cords snake across crew shoulders. Brevity cards are taped where hands can find them without eyes. The plan says the sky will hammer first, then the tanks will pour through the cut. Plans rarely meet hedgerows cleanly. When the bombing lifts, the first company noses forward and meets the country, the enemy-designed one-lane throats with murder at the bend. A pack gun, hidden behind a clipped hedge, spits once and punches the lead vehicle's glacis. The driver dies with his hands locked. The tank lurches, blocks the lane. In the old fear, everyone would stop, then die slower. Instead, the net comes alive with language so short, it feels like muscle smoke lane. Hook right 2, black battery alpha. White blooms in the lane before the second German round. 2 Shermans pivot off-axis tracks, clawing damp earth, presenting armor to the threat, while cutting toward a pre-briefed hedge notch. Infantry peel from half-tracks and melt into the ditch rifles, searching for muzzle-flash bazooka teams, crouched to finish what smoke conceals. The forward observer, already living on the maneuver net, speaks a grid that was chosen at 03 or 0. The battery answers like a reflex. A curtain of 105s descends on the gun's likely retreat line, hedgerow segments, exploding into dirty fountains of leaves and brown water. The kill zone's geometry shudders. Where a blocked lead should mean paralysis, the column breaks itself into parts that move as one intention. The stalled tank gets a tow cable. The second platoon shifts to a farm track that had looked like nothing on the map. The company commander says, "online," and 3 muzzles appear where the German gun expected none. The pack crew is brave and drills their switch. The second position spits, but its field was plotted onto a TRP before sunrise, and the FO is already walking steel across that hedge. The net does not narrate. It executes. All morning, the pattern repeats and accelerates. German fire opens cleanly, first shot, sometimes the second, but the American recovery strips the ambush of its momentum. Smoke buys the first 5 seconds. The hook buys the next 15. Artillery buys the minute that follows when a good crew would otherwise bump to a secondary. Tracks, grind engines, drown, but words remain intelligible. A platoon leader spends 5 syllables to move 5 vehicles. A loader, seeing a muzzle flash at the edge of smoke, says "left tight" into the interphone, and the gun traverses in the same breath. By midday, the lane is not a lane but a seam, and seams tear. Armor pushes through the beaten belt into open fields where ranges lengthen, and the Sherman's supposed inferiority is cushioned by numbers and air. But even in the hedgerow rooms behind them, something fundamental has changed. Ambush geometry no longer guarantees tempo. The FM radio battle network has been deployed at scale, company, battalion, division, with artillery, listening, and infantry wired into the same small language. The columns do not become invulnerable. They become coherent under shock. Late afternoon, the battalion seizes a crossroads that had survived months as a German habit. The after-action note will read dryly, "Hedgerow resistance overcome. Movement resumed." What it won't capture is the sensation shared across crews, the moment when the enemy's trap felt like a door, and then the door opened because a voice traveled faster than fear. Cobra's breach is the headline. Inside it lives a quieter line of type in the first 10 seconds after every ambush radio's regulated time. The German side meets the same morning with familiar confidence. The ground is chosen sightlines, measured by patient men who can feel range in their bones. A pack crew has rehearsed first shot to halt second, to kill bump to secondary fade. A panzer hull sits low in orchard shade, its gunner steady, its commander watching dust fingers rise over the lane. They know American tanks are many. They also know how many seconds men need to panic. That knowledge has paid for months. The first shot lands, and the familiar thrill control arrives for 3 heartbeats. Then the air fills with a white wall that wasn't in yesterday's fights. Smoke blooms not as a scream of retreat, but as a signal. Muzzles appear where they shouldn't, left and right not stacked front to rear. A pair of Shermans slides off the road with the indifference of a drill, not the flail of fear. Across the hedge, an American voice calls for fire in a tone that is not excited enough to be new. The German commander swallows the first taste of doubt. Why are they moving faster after the shock? The pack crew tries to bump, but the retreat line, so carefully selected, is already receiving steel. Shells walk the hedge like a boot stepping on ribs. The gunner keeps discipline and searches for new angles. The loader's hands do not shake. The commander calls the secondary by code, but the movement they need from the enemy, the freeze, the bunching, doesn't come. Instead, the Americans thicken along the ditch, not the road, and the second volley that should harvest a clustered column clips smoke and hits nothing with certainty. Elsewhere on the net, German reports begin to disagree with expectations. The Americans are talking, a monitoring operator notes, but we're not hearing confusion. Short calls, repeating patterns. A company commander tries to anticipate their next turn based on yesterday's fear. Yesterday, a blocked lead meant a stalled unit and a flanking shot into helpless steel. Today, a blocked lead means an opening elsewhere, and the opening arrives in less than a half-minute. The shock is not just tactical, it is philosophical. The tempo of ambush has been stolen. A panzer troop edges to a new line and meets artillery that falls with unnerving specificity on the track they must cross to re-engage. Someone on the American side is listening to the same fight as the guns. The German commander understands what that implies and does not enjoy the thought the artillery liaison is not in a far tent. He is in the column's conversation. When he speaks, steel moves. The crew watches smoke thin and expects the Americans to hesitate as visibility returns. Instead, the Shermans complete their hook and present armor to the orchard. The first American round is not a lucky blind. It is placed as if guided by an eye that never lost the thread. Minutes compress. Battles used to feel like unfolding arguments. Now they feel like doors slamming in sequence. The German system, brilliant at staging the first sentence, finds the rest of its paragraph being spoken by someone else. Even where German gunners win the opening exchange, they lose the second and third, the places where Doctrine counted on hesitation. A platoon that should be prey is on their flank. A white burst masks a pivot that collapses the perfect angle. A battery that should be late is already on the wire. By day's end, the realization has a shape crews can taste. The Americans have made conversation into a weapon, and it is being used with factory regularity. Reports bubble upward, ambushes, broken withdrawal lines, interdicted lanes reopened too quickly to mine. The word radios appears in debriefs, but what men remember is not hardware. It is the feel of fighting a unit that thinks together in seconds. The Axis learns painfully and honestly that courage and groundcraft no longer guarantee control when the opponent can rearrange the geometry faster than you can blink. The last position yields at dusk. The orchard smells of sap and cordite. A German sergeant who has done everything right watches an American column roll past a lane that should have been a tomb and says nothing at all. The terror is not in the shells. It is in the certainty that tomorrow's ambush will fail in the same way because the other side has found a way to make time obey. Strategy changes when seconds change. Once the FM radio battle network became routine company through division armor to artillery, the Western Front's calendar tilted. Breakouts were no longer once-in-a-campaign miracles. They were repeatable procedures built from the same microscopic deltas the radios manufactured all day. First, operational tempo. Before a successful hedgerow fight still bled momentum, the column paused to sort itself. Staff waited on clarity, artillery shifted nets. With the battle network, recovery and retasking happened inside a breath. A battalion commander could redirect a company around a blocked lane while fires still walked the retreat line. Pursuits that once stalled at nightfall now pushed into the blue hour because units retained coherence after shock. Resupply found moving columns in weather that used to mute orders. The enemy's favorite weapon, friction, lost its teeth. Second, fires as a reflex. Artillery ceased to be a distant promise and became a local muscle. Forward observers living on maneuver nets, liaisons straddling command and fire direction circuits, pre-registered TRPs pinned to overlays before dawn, together they turned steel into a time-on-target habit. German doctrine that counted on a clean withdrawal to secondary positions found those corridors already combed by shells. The effect scaled upward. Regimental and division guns could mass without ceremony, because the conversation that summoned them ran through the same fabric that moved tanks and infantry. Third, combined arms integrity. The battle network did not belong to armor alone. Infantry platoons learned the same brevity. Engineers cutting gaps spoke on the same nets. Reconnaissance screens pushed contact reports directly into the hands that could exploit them. In cities and forests where broken sightlines usually shatter cohesion, radio and interphone stitched squads to platoons, platoons to companies. Distributed initiative stopped being a slogan and became the default, leaders acting locally inside a shared picture. Fourth, shorter operational pauses. Staff planning used to assume a day to untangle columns after major contact. Now the untangling happened while the contact was still warm. That changed the math of exploitation. After a breach Saint-Lô to Marigny, the sweep across the Avranches Gate, the drive into Lorraine, the difference between breakthrough and breakout narrowed to how fast fresh formations could be fed into the seam. Radios ensured those formations arrived synchronized rather than merely present. Fifth, counter-ambush saturation. German units adapted. They set more complex traps, stacked mines with AT guns, doubled back on their own routes. Yet the same pattern recurred. The first seconds belonged to them, the rest to a force that could outdecide. As more American outfits internalized the drill smoke, hook, suppress, re-attack, the psychological balance shifted. An ambush that failed in the same way 3 days in a row is a message to both sides. The geometry is no longer yours. Finally, institutional memory. The habits forged in 1944. Brevity discipline, FO on maneuver nets, standardized racks and cables, redundancy as design principle outlived the campaign. They migrated into post-war doctrine, armored C2 artillery liaison practice, NATO standardization of voice procedures, the expectation that radios regulate time, not merely carry words. Seen from this height, the battle network's strategic gift was not only faster fights, it was predictable speed. Predictability is what turns daring into policy. It let Allied commanders schedule risk with confidence, plan a pursuit window after the afternoon's hedgerow fighting, assume a battalion could pivot mid-march without dissolving count on fires arriving on the road the enemy must take. There were still hard days, bitter towns, and losses that no net could erase. But across the whole front from the Bocage to the German border, the same quiet arithmetic kept paying out. Shave 10 seconds from recovery, 15 from the hook, 30 from the curtain of steel, multiply by 100 contacts, and you change a theater. The war machine did not simply roll because factories built tanks and trucks. It rolled because voices made those tanks and trucks behave like one intention moving through space. Strategy is the art of guaranteed follow-through. Radios guaranteed it in the only currency the front obeyed: time. After the war, Axis memoirs tried to explain why ambushes that had worked from Poland to Sicily faltered in Normandy and beyond. The pages rarely mention mystery armor or secret shells. They come back again and again to speed and coherence on the American side, how units that should have frozen after the first hit instead multiplied options in seconds. German armored commanders writing about the summer of 1944 often acknowledged three things in substance, if not in the same sentence. First, American artillery response times, immediate and unnervingly accurate, disrupted planned withdrawals. Second, American radio control at company and battalion level held the attack together when terrain should have scattered it. Third, American exploitation after a local success arrived faster than staff estimates, suggesting that orders moved as if along a wire. A Panzer Division leader, reflecting on the Hedgerows, conceded in paraphrase that what he had assumed would be confusion on American nets was not confusion at all, but short formulas, and that once those formulas began, our second positions were already under fire. An artillery officer, summarizing his regiment's frustration, admitted that the enemy seemed to carry their guns with them, a bitter way of describing liaison officers and forward observers living on maneuver nets. An operations chief, reviewing his notes on the Avranches Gate, wrote that American columns did not stop being units during shock. and that this was new and decisive. Albert Speer, in his assessments of the Allied way of war, stressed industry and logistics. Field commanders added the glue that let that mass act with precision. Call it doctrine procedure, radio discipline, call it the FM radio battle network. The last word belongs to those who tried to crush it, and could not. Courage held the line on both sides, but the side that made time obey decided where the line moved.